坐落于加州硅谷的 Santa Clara 县，集合了包括 Apple、Google、Intel、Cisco 和雅虎等数十间世界知名的高科技公司。这里的整体人口为全美第6大。根据2020年人口普查数据，整个县的人口超过了193万，其中38.9%为亚裔，也是整个县人口占比最多的族裔。
I think hate crimes are very underreported. I think it's very important to send a strong message that we do not tolerate hate and that hate doesn't have a home here.
从语言骚扰到暴力袭击，在新冠疫情下，反亚裔仇恨犯罪愈演愈烈。是谁在犯下这些罪行？又是谁在帮助我们维护权益？大家好，欢迎收看《仇恨边缘》，我是主持人张欣毅。今天天下卫视请到 Santa Clara 县地检官 Jeff Rosen 一起来聊一聊如何辨认、预防和指控仇恨犯罪。Hi, Mr. Rosen. How are you?
I'm very well, Shana. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming to our show.
A pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, could you do a little bit introduction about yourself?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I went to UCLA, so I did my undergrad. I went to Berkeley for law school, and then after law school, I worked for a couple years in law firms in Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. But I always wanted to be a prosecutor and serve the community. And so I was hired as a deputy DA in 1995 in Santa Clara County. And then in 2010, I ran for district attorney and I was elected. And I have been reelected 3 times since then. Santa Clara County has about 2 million people, very diverse population, about 35% Asian, 33% white, 26% Latino, and 3% African American. So a very diverse place.
Wow, you re-elected 3 times. That's very impressive.
Yeah, well, thank you. The voters wanted me to continue to serve, and I'm happy to serve them. And I think in the most recent election, there was a real choice for the voters as to whether to have someone from the very far left or the very far right, or to have somebody that was more towards the center, making reforms that help the criminal justice system, but also keep the community safe. And that's what the voters chose.
Wow, so since 2010?
Yes.
And over here is over 10 years. So
yeah.
What do you see the population changed? You mentioned that 35% is Asian.
Yeah, the population of Santa Clara County has become more and more diverse the longer I've lived in Santa Clara County. So when I started in the DA's office in 1995, the county was much whiter than it is today. But over the last 20 years or so, there's been tremendous immigration, really from all over the world, to come and work at Google and Facebook and Apple and all of these tech companies. Yeah. And so the county has become more Asian, more really just about 40% of the people that live in our county were not born in the United States. So it's a very immigrant-heavy community. A lot of different languages are spoken, but people come to Santa Clara County for reasons that people come to America, for better opportunity and a better life for themselves and their children.
Yeah, that's true. American dream.
Yeah.
So could you mention a little bit about your accomplishment? For me, I know you, like we mentioned before, I know you from the very famous Stanford rape case, Chanel Miller, Emily
Yes.
Doe. So could you also cover a little bit other case you prosecute over the 10 years?
So I think some of the significant prosecutions we've had in the DA's office have included the Stanford rapist Brock Turner, as you had mentioned. Also, we prosecuted 3 jail guards for murdering an inmate, one of the few successful prosecutions of law enforcement officers for murder anywhere in the United States. In addition to that, we've done a number of cases involving individuals who steal cryptocurrency in the amount of millions of dollars, and we've been able to arrest and bring those people to justice even when they've committed their crimes from outside of the United States. And then the last thing I would mention is there's a number of cold case murders that we have solved recently, cases that were 30 to 35 years old, where we found the person who committed the crime and have brought them to justice, whether we had to bring somebody here from Hawaii or somebody from the Netherlands and Europe to face justice for these murder cases.
I see. So do you have any successful case to prosecute hate crime?
Really, absolutely, and unfortunately. So in the past few years, there's been a significant increase in hate crimes committed against all minorities in our community, but particularly against Asian Americans. And so there are a number of cases that we're currently prosecuting where Asian Americans were targeted, whether it's Asian American women who were targeted for robbery by a crew that committed dozens of these kinds of crimes, or a woman that someone attempted to rape, as well as a number of cases involving individuals spitting on Asian Americans or threatening to kill them, yelling about coronavirus and the China flu, these kinds of things. So we've certainly seen an increase, and we've been very aggressive and vigorous in prosecuting those cases.
So compare with last 10 years you being in the DA office, those 2 years under COVID, what's the data, compare with those two?
Sure. So we track the number of hate crimes that we prosecute every year. And in 2020, we filed more hate crime cases than we had in the previous 10 years. We filed 14 cases. And then in 2021, we filed 23 hate crime cases, which is by far more hate crimes than we've ever charged in our office. Of those 23 cases that we filed in 2021, 9 were Asian American victims. And so far in 2022, we filed 10 cases. So what I'm hoping is that we saw a peak in 2021 at the height of COVID, and things are beginning to settle down. I hope.
I hope so too. 好，我们接下来进一段广告，之后马上回来。欢迎进入仇恨边缘。在我们继续和 Santa Clara 县地检官 Jeff Rosen 来聊仇恨犯罪之前，先来看一段1分钟的短片。
This is not a Chinese virus.
This is not an Italian virus.
Viruses do not have ethnicities, religion, sexuality, or gender.
But our community does.
And if you hurt or threaten someone because of those things, you'll have a lot more to worry about than COVID-19. When you attack a member of our community because of their ethnicity, the color of their skin, or where you think someone is from,
then you have attacked us all.
Okay, DA Rosen, since we talk about hate crime, so what does it take to charge a hate crime?
A hate crime requires, number one, that there is some kind of underlying crime, whether that's vandalism or assault or robbery. And in addition, what makes that crime a hate crime is that a substantial motivation for the criminal to commit that crime is the ethnicity or the race or the religion or the sexual orientation of the victim. So it's a very difficult crime to prove because we have to show what the perpetrator's motivation is. That they didn't want to just commit a robbery, they wanted to commit a robbery against an Asian person. So there's different kinds of evidence we look for to determine what that motivation is.
I see. So you had charged hate crime, I think back in 2019, but that's not hate crime against the Asian American, that's against a Muslim.
So there's a number of significant hate crime cases that we've charged. One is in 2019, a man targeted what he thought were Muslims to run over with his car in a crosswalk. Instead, he wound up severely injuring a number of Hindus and others from India. But we charged that as a hate crime because the reason that he attacked those people was because of what he perceived their religion or ethnicity to be. So a hate crime is a crime, and then that the motivation for that crime is a bias or a hatred towards a particular ethnic group.
So in that case, what kind of evidence we got in order to charge hate crime? So how do we know he attacked them because their religion?
So in that particular case, back in 2019 in Sunnyvale, we know what his motivation was based on statements that he had made to the police, as well as things that he had written on social media. So one of the ways in which we figure out what somebody's motivation is are things that they say either before they commit the crime or after they commit the crime, or things that they have posted on social media.
Okay, so if we don't have those evidence, we cannot just assume.
That's correct. We can't just assume that because a person who is victimized by a crime is black or Asian or Hispanic or gay, we can't just assume that that's the reason they were targeted, because unfortunately sometimes crimes are committed, but in the case of a hate crime, often the evidence that we look to is there something the perpetrator might say. For instance, we've had several cases in our county where some Asian Americans were eating lunch and a person walked up to them and started yelling Asian slurs, go back to China, different kinds of derogatory statements, and then spit on that person or punch that person. So because of those words that were used, we know then what the motivation was, that it was a hatred or bias against Asians, and so then we charge that as a hate crime.
I see. There's several incidents happened recently in San Francisco that the perpetrator didn't charge hate crime, and the victim was not happy about that.
Yes.
And so for that, I just want to ask why it's important to charge hate crime.
I think it's incredibly important to charge hate crimes when we have the evidence of them, because a hate crime is really a crime against three. It's a crime against that individual person that was targeted. It's a crime against that person's whole ethnic community. You know, when one Chinese American is spit on in Mountain View, many Chinese Americans all over the Bay Area hear about it and are concerned about it, rightfully so. And finally, a hate crime is really a crime against all of us as Americans who are entitled to fair and respectful treatment under the law. So that's why I think it's very important to send a strong message that we do not tolerate hate and that hate doesn't have a home here.
Yeah. And so a lot of new immigrants doesn't actually understand the whole process when we charge hate crime. What DA's role in the whole process compared with police department and investigators?
I think hate crimes are very underreported, meaning that there are more hate crimes that are happening that victims do not then report those to the police. Why wouldn't a victim report to the police? Well, they're new to the United States, they're not sure how things work here. There's also a sense that a number of victims feel of shame, like somehow this is my fault that I stood out in this way and I just want to blend in with everyone else. A number of the hate crimes that we have prosecuted in our county are not because the victim reported it, but because some other witness or bystander saw what happened and then called the police. And then once the police came, then the victim would cooperate. So I think that there are crimes that are very underreported. The way things work in our system is generally the police investigate the crime and then bring that to the district attorney's office for us to decide whether there is enough evidence to file charges. And when it comes to hate crimes, in the last 3 years in our county, pretty much every case that the police department has brought to us for a hate crime, we have charged as a hate crime.
So do you have general data about who is committing those crimes and who is the majority target of this?
So because our community is so diverse, the victims of the hate crimes are diverse as well. They're Asian, they're Latino, they're African American, they're Jewish. And also the perpetrators are diverse. Sometimes some cases the perpetrators are white. In other cases the perpetrators are Latino or African American, and it really is mixed in that way. And one of the things that it shows us is that, unfortunately anyone can be biased or bigoted. And so the other point I would make to your viewers about hate crimes is not only do we get an enhanced punishment when a person commits a hate crime, the law also does something very unusual with hate crimes in that it strongly suggests that part of the person's sentence who committed the hate crime should be taking classes or doing community service about the ethnicity of the victim that they had harmed. And so, for instance, working for the Asian Americans for Community Involvement or the Japanese American Civil League if the victims were Japanese or Asian. And I think the reason behind this is that we want to try to change people's hearts and their minds, and so that the person who commits a hate crime today, maybe a few years from now, will be a person that intervenes and is an upstander to prevent a hate crime.
Yeah, that's very positive way to look at it.
Yes.
好，我们进一段广告，然后马上回来。欢迎回到仇恨边缘，我们继续和 Santa Clara 县地检官 Jeff Rosen 一起聊一下仇恨犯罪。Okay, Mr. Rosen, so what do you see in the future on hate crime?
Well, what I see in the future, what I hope for, is that there are fewer hate crimes in the future. Our goal in the DA's office is not that there should be a crime committed and then we prosecute it. Our goal really is that there are fewer crimes in the first place. So some of the ways that we are working to try to decrease the number of hate crimes are, one, having a very diverse district attorney's office. So currently today, more than 40% of the prosecutors in our office are Asian American, African American, Latino, or LGBTQ+. I'm very proud that under my leadership, we've had the first Asian American that was named as an executive manager in our office, Scott Sway, an immigrant from China. And 5 of the most important units in the office are supervised by Asian Americans, whether that's our fraud team, our sexual assault team, juvenile team, South County office, as well as other important offices in the DA's office. So I think that diversity is one way to try to break down stereotypes that individuals have. In addition, I'm very honored that the National Association of Asian and Pacific Islander Prosecutors, NAPIPA, was started in my office and now has chapters all over the country with hundreds of Asian American prosecutors who, among other things, do outreach to different Asian American communities to encourage cooperation with law enforcement and also to encourage young Asian Americans to become police officers, prosecutors, or judges. And so I think these are some of the ways in which we try to break down the stereotypes that people have.
Yeah, so besides in your office, besides from the district attorney office, so what do you see as a county or even country, how to prevent hate crime from the first place?
I think that in 2020 and 2021, after there were a series of high publicized attacks against Asian Americans, I thought that the response from our community was very strong. There were many, many rallies and gatherings and protests to say no anti-Asian hate. Asian Americans are our neighbors, they are our community, and I think that was a very positive development so that Asian Americans do not feel alone or isolated. They're a part of the fabric of our community. So I think that that was a very positive sign. I think that given the diverse communities we live in, the more that people interact with others that look different from them or have different religious practices, I think the more comfortable people become with one another, and we get to a point where we're judging people based on what we'd say the content of their character and not what their skin looks like.
Okay, so from the victim perspective, if hate crime happened to Asian people on the street, at that moment, what they can do to provide the evidence as prosecutor, can have those evidence in order to charge hate crime?
So first of all, if someone believes they're the victim of a hate crime, someone is calling them negative names about their ethnicity and then hurts them or attacks them or threatens to hurt them, they should call the police, cooperate with the police, and the person should know that the police and the prosecutor's office, we will do everything we can to bring the person who did this to justice. If we're not able to charge a crime or a hate crime, we will explain why to you. But if you don't call the police, there's nothing that we can do. And sometimes when the police are called and they have a conversation with the person that made these ethnic slurs, it can have a very positive result in that it's a way of reminding everyone in our community of what our values are. And I think that's very, very important. We made the public service announcement that I think you showed your viewers earlier about the importance of hate crimes because we think that we're trying to send a message to perpetrators that we don't tolerate hate crimes. We're trying to send a message to victims that we care and we want you to report these crimes. And we're sending a message to our community to remind everyone of what our values are, which is respect and tolerance and fair treatment for everyone. So if someone thinks that they're the victim of a hate crime, they absolutely should call the police. If someone witnesses what they think is a hate crime happening, and I get this question a lot, well, what should I do? Well, every situation is different. We don't want you to put yourself in physical danger and escalate the problem. One thing that we have seen that's very effective is if you see someone who's being targeted with ethnic slurs, literally for you to stand next to that person, to just stand next to that person. And that sends a very powerful message to that person who's being victimized, as well as to the person that's saying these things, which is, I stand with this person. And sometimes that will help to calm the situation. But if things escalate to physical violence, please call the police. We will respond and intervene.
Wow, I never thought about that. You can just stand there without like confronting with the...
Yes, it's very powerful.
Wow. Thank you so much. This very educational and informative conversation with you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. 好，今天的节目就告一段落。仇恨边缘是一档聚焦反亚裔仇恨犯罪的访谈节目。我们今后还会请到更多的政客、教授以及专家一起来探讨仇恨犯罪。我们也希望这期节目能够被更多的需要了解和需要帮助的人看到。让我们一起共同努力，把周围变成一个充满爱而不是恨的地方。我是主持人张歆艺，我们下期节目见。正在收看节目的你，如果有任何问题想要问我们的来宾，欢迎在评论区留言，我们会仔细查看每一条评论，并联系该嘉宾帮忙解答。让我们共同努力，为停止仇恨犯罪贡献一份力量。